the wedding day. For many, it is the ultimate culmination of a love story. A promise whispered in a quiet moment, now declared before the world. It's a day of pure, unblemished joy, a celebration of a bond so profound that only two words can truly define it: I do. We look at the bride, radiant in her gown, and we see hope, a future, and the beginning of forever. But what if that white lace concealed the darkest crimson secrets? What if the promise of "till death do us part" wasn't just a vow, but a threat? We believe that love is selfless, that it is about sacrifice and protection. But how far is too far? At what point does protection become possession? When does sacrifice curdle into something sinister? Today, we lift the veil on a story of a love so consuming, it left no room for anything else or anyone else. It's a story of a bride who would do anything to protect her perfect world, even if it meant destroying the lives of those who stood in her way. Before we walk down the aisle and into this chilling tale of obsessive love, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single revelation in this story of devotion and destruction. Now let us begin. This is Till Death Do Us Part, the bride who killed for love. Isabella Dubois believed in love the way an astronomer believes in the stars. It was a force of nature, vast, complex, occasionally violent, but ultimately the guiding principle of the universe. Her universe, for the past 4 years, had been a man named Ethan Hayes. Ethan was not a dramatic, star-crossing lover from a novel. He was something far better. He was real. He was the quiet comfort of a Sunday morning, the steady hand on her back in a crowded room, the easy laughter that could erase the memory of a bad day. He was an architect, a man who built things strong, beautiful, enduring things, and he was building a life for them. Their love story was, by all accounts, perfect. They had met at a charity auction, bidding on the same painting, a moody, abstract cityscape. He'd let her win, only to find her afterward and declare that he couldn't let the painting go without knowing the woman who appreciated it as much as he did. From that first conversation, a bond was forged, an effortless connection that felt less like discovery and more like remembrance. Now, they lived in a minimalist, glass-walled house Ethan had designed, overlooking the city where they'd met. Their life was a curated collection of beautiful moments. Wine tasting in the countryside, late-night debates about art and philosophy, quiet evenings where the only sound was the scratch of Ethan's pen on drafting paper and the soft rustle of Isabella turning a page in her book. And in 6 months, they would be married. The wedding was planned, the venue booked, the dress a magnificent creation of silk and lace was in the final stages of fitting. Everything was perfect. The first crack in this perfect facade appeared not as a tremor, but as a shadow at the edge of their sunlit world. His name was Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been Ethan's business partner. Together, fresh out of graduate school, they had founded Hayes and Thorne, an architectural firm with a bold, sustainable vision. Ethan was the artist, the visionary. Marcus was the pragmatist, the salesman. For a time, the partnership worked. But as the firm grew, so did Marcus's appetite. He pushed for cheaper materials, for cutting ethical corners to win lucrative contracts, for sacrificing Ethan's artistic integrity for a larger profit margin. The disagreements became arguments, the arguments became a schism, and the schism ended in a bitter, acrimonious split. Ethan, with a small but loyal team, started his own firm. Marcus kept the original company, the clients, and the capital. The legal battle had drained Ethan's savings and left him with a mountain of debt, but he was slowly, painstakingly, building his reputation back. He had just landed a career-defining project, the commission to design the new city art museum. It was a monumental achievement, a testament to his talent and resilience. It was the project that would finally put the ugliness with Marcus behind them and secure their future. Isabella was fiercely protective of that future. She had watched the stress of the lawsuit carve new lines around Ethan's eyes. She had held him late at night when he confessed his fear of failure, of not being able to give her the life he felt she deserved. She loved him with a totality that was both her greatest strength and her most profound vulnerability. His pain was her pain, and his enemies were her enemies. and Marcus Thorne was the chief architect of his pain. Marcus did not take the news of Ethan's success well. He saw the museum project as a personal slight, a victory for the man he had tried to ruin. The harassment started subtly. Vicious, anonymous comments on industry blogs questioning Ethan's competence. Whispers to city council members about his firm's financial instability. Then it escalated. A key supplier suddenly pulled out of their contract, citing a better offer. A promising young draftsman was poached by Marcus with a staggering salary. Isabella watched as the old tension returned to Ethan's shoulders. He tried to hide it from her, but she saw it in the way he stared blankly at his blueprints, the way he absently rubbed his temples when he thought she wasn't looking. The breaking point came one rainy Tuesday evening. Ethan came home, his face pale, his suit soaked through. He dropped his briefcase by the door and sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. He knows. Ethan's voice was a choked whisper. Marcus knows. Knows what, my love? Isabella asked, kneeling in front of him, her hands on his knees. About my father, Ethan said, his voice cracking. Years ago, Ethan's father, also an architect, had made a devastating miscalculation on a structural engineering project. The building had been evacuated before a collapse, so no one was hurt, but the scandal had ruined him professionally and personally. It was Ethan's deepest, most private shame, a wound he carried in silence. Marcus found the old settlement papers, Ethan continued. He's threatening to leak them to the press. He's gonna paint me with the same brush. He told the museum board that instability runs in the family. He's trying to get them to invoke the ethics clause in my contract. Isabella felt a cold, pure rage crystallize in her chest. This was no longer business. This was a violation. Marcus Thorne was not just attacking Ethan's career. He was desecrating the memory of his father, poisoning his soul. She looked at the man she loved, a man so good and so brilliant, being systematically dismantled by a petty, jealous tyrant. In that moment, a quiet, terrifying clarity descended upon her. She had always thought of love as a gentle thing, a nurturing light. But she was wrong. True love was a fortress, and it was her duty to stand on the battlements and eliminate any threat, by any means necessary. The world was full of messy, imperfect solutions, but for a problem like Marcus Thorne, there was only one perfect, permanent solution. Her mind, which she'd always prided herself on for its analytical precision. She was a data analyst for a risk management firm. After all, began to work with chilling efficiency. This could not be a crime of passion. It had to be a work of art, as meticulously planned and flawlessly executed as one of Ethan's buildings. No loose ends, no emotional residue. Just a problem and a solution. The first step was research. For the next 3 weeks, Isabella became a student of Marcus Thorne. She used her skills to build a complete digital profile of him, far beyond what social media could offer. She delved into his financials, his medical records, his daily routines. She learned that he had a penchant for high-stakes poker games, a weakness for expensive scotch, and, most importantly, a severe and life-threatening allergy to shellfish. The allergy was so severe that he carried 2 EpiPens with him at all times. Anaphylactic shock. The perfect killer, masquerading as a tragic accident. The second step was opportunity. The annual Architects Guild Gala was in a month. It was the premier event of the season. Both Ethan and Marcus would be there. It was the perfect stage, crowded, chaotic, with 100 potential distractions. The third step was the weapon. Couldn't be a piece of shrimp dropped in his champagne. That was crude, traceable. She needed something more insidious, something that wouldn't trigger an immediate reaction, something that could be dismissed as cross-contamination in a busy kitchen. She spent a weekend in her kitchen, experimenting. She discovered that a highly concentrated, almost clear oil rendered from shrimp shells was virtually odorless and tasteless when mixed with a strong spirit, like the single malt scotch Marcus favored. A few drops would be enough. The reaction wouldn't be instantaneous. It would take 10, maybe 15 minutes, long enough for her to be an entire room away, talking to a city councilman's wife about summer vacation plans. The final step was the alibi. And this, she knew, was the most crucial part. Her alibi would be Ethan himself. She would be the loving, supportive fiancée, sticking by his side, a picture of grace and devotion. The night of the gala arrived. A swirl of black ties, shimmering gowns, and tinkling champagne glasses. Isabella wore a stunning emerald green dress that brought out the fire in her red hair. Ethan, handsome in his tuxedo, was nervous. His entire career felt as though it were hanging in the balance, dependent on the conversations he would have that night. "You look beautiful," he said, squeezing her hand as they entered the grand ballroom. "But I feel like I'm walking to my own execution." "Nonsense," Isabella said, her voice a calm, reassuring melody. She kissed his cheek. "You are the most talented man in this room. They all know it. Tonight we just remind them. You handle the board members. I'll run interference. We're a team." She guided him through the crowd, a perfect social navigator. She kept him away from Marcus, steering him toward allies and influential figures. For 2 hours, she played her part flawlessly. She laughed, she schmoozed, she made introductions. All the while, her eyes tracked Marcus Thorne. She watched him at the bar, saw him order his customary Macallan 25. Neat. She noted the bartender who served him. She watched him move to a secluded corner with a group of developers, his back to the room. This was her window. "Darling, I'm going to get some air," she whispered to Ethan, who was deep in conversation with the museum's curator. "It's a little stuffy in here. I'll be on the terrace." She didn't go to the terrace. She moved with purpose through the throng of people, her path weaving like a thread through a loom, until she reached the bar. The bartender who had served Marcus was now at the other end, busy with a complicated cocktail order. In her small, elegant clutch, she carried a tiny, clear glass vial, no bigger than a tube of lipstick. With a practiced, fluid motion, she picked up a clean glass and a bottle of the Macallan 25. Her back was to the room, shielded by a large floral arrangement. Her hands didn't shake. Her heart rate was steady. This was not murder. It was a risk assessment, problem being solved. She uncorked the vial and let 3 viscous drops of the concentrated shellfish oil fall into the glass. She swirled it once, then poured a generous measure of the dark amber liquid over it. She walked calmly toward Marcus's corner. As she approached, she accidentally stumbled, jostling a passing waiter. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, her voice full of breathless apology. The waiter, flustered, barely registered her. The brief commotion was the perfect cover. She arrived at Marcus's side. "Marcus, how are you?" she said, her smile dazzling. He turned, his expression one of mild surprise. "Isabella, I didn't expect you to be speaking to me." "Oh, don't be silly," she said, her tone light and forgiving. "Business is business. Ethan is a grown-up. We all are. In fact, I brought you a peace offering." She handed him the glass of scotch. To a successful new museum, no matter who builds it, Marcus was taken aback, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. But her open, friendly demeanor, combined with the offer of his favorite expensive scotch, disarmed him. It would be rude to refuse, and Marcus Thorne was never rude when it served his purpose to be charming. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "to the museum." He raised the glass and took a substantial drink. "Enjoy," Isabella said, her smile never wavering. She turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd. She did not look back. She found Ethan and resumed her role. 10 minutes later, from across the room, she saw the first signs. Marcus clutching his throat, a look of confusion, then panic on his face. He fumbled in his jacket, his movements becoming clumsy. He was reaching for his EpiPen. Isabella chose that exact moment to create a diversion. She let out a small, theatrical gasp and pretended to trip, sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The sound was explosive. Every head in the vicinity turned toward her. Ethan rushed to her side, full of concern. "I'm so sorry. My heel caught on the carpet," she said, allowing Ethan to help her up. How embarrassing. In the precious seconds her diversion had bought, Marcus's condition had worsened dramatically. His airway was closing. He managed to get the EpiPen out, but his fingers were numb and uncoordinated. He dropped it, skittered under a table. People were starting to notice now, turning from her manufactured drama to his real one. A woman screamed. Someone shouted to call 911. By the time people reached him, it was too late. His face was blue, his body convulsing. He collapsed. An off-duty doctor in the crowd rushed to perform CPR, but it was hopeless. Anaphylactic shock is brutally swift. Isabella clung to Ethan's arm, her face a perfect mask of horror and shock. "Oh my God, Ethan," she whispered. "That's Marcus." The rest of the evening was a blur of ambulance sirens, flashing lights, and police questions. The official narrative formed quickly. A tragic accident. The kitchen was understaffed, the caterers overwhelmed. There must have been some cross-contamination. He had a known, severe allergy. He'd tried to use his EpiPen and dropped it. It was a terrible, unfortunate sequence of events. Isabella gave her statement to a weary-looking detective. Yes, she had spoken to him. No, she hadn't seen what he was eating or drinking. She was on the other side of the room with her fiancé when the commotion started. Ethan, his own shock and complicated grief evident, corroborated her story completely. They were together the entire time. Later that night, back in the sanctuary of their glass house, Ethan held her tightly. "I can't believe it," he said, his voice hollow. "I hated him. God, I really hated what he was doing to us. But I never wanted this." "I know, my love," Isabella whispered, stroking his hair. "It's a tragedy." She felt a profound sense of peace. The threat was gone. The shadow had been vanquished. Their future was safe again. She had protected him. She had protected them. 6 months later, Isabella Dubois walked down the aisle toward Ethan Hayes. She wore her magnificent white gown, her face covered by a delicate lace veil. The church was filled with flowers and sunlight. As she reached the altar, Ethan took her hand, his eyes shining with a love so pure and deep it took her breath away. They turned to the priest. They spoke their vows, their voices clear and steady. "Till death do us part," Isabella repeated, her eyes locked on Ethan's. And in the silent, secret chambers of her heart, she added another line, "And I will kill anyone who ever tries to part us." It was not a thought. It was a vow, the most sacred one of all. Married life was everything Isabella had envisioned. It was a seamless continuation of their perfect courtship, now sanctified by law and celebrated by society. Ethan's museum project was proceeding beautifully, his genius finally unhindered. The dark cloud of Marcus Thorne's threats had vanished, leaving only blue skies. Ethan grieved for his former partner in a complicated, quiet way, but Isabella could see the relief in his posture, the return of his easy smile. Their life was a masterpiece of domestic bliss, and Isabella was its ever-vigilant curator. The first hint that her curation was imperfect came in the form of a man named Detective Miles Miller. Miller was the weary-looking detective from the night of the gala. He was in his late 50s, with a rumpled suit that seemed a permanent part of his anatomy and eyes that held a deep, gravitational pull of cynicism. He was a man who didn't believe in perfect accidents. He showed up at their house on a Saturday morning 3 months after the wedding. Isabella had been arranging flowers in the sun-drenched living room. Ethan was upstairs in his studio, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. The doorbell was a jarring interruption. "Mrs. Hayes," Detective Miller said, holding up his badge. "I apologize for the intrusion. I just have a few follow-up questions about the night Marcus Thorne died." "May I come in?" Isabella's smile didn't falter. "Of course, Detective. Please." She led him into the living room, her movements graceful and unhurried. Inside, her mind was racing, cataloging possibilities, assessing risks. "My husband is just upstairs. Should I get him?" "No, that's all right," Miller said, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in every detail. "It's really you I wanted to talk to." He sat on the edge of the sofa, refusing her offer of coffee. We've been closing the case file, and I just had one small, nagging detail I couldn't shake. Oh, Isabella asked, sitting opposite him, her posture open and relaxed. The bartender who served Mr. Thorne his last drink, Miller began, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. He remembers Thorne ordering a Macallan 25, but he's adamant he didn't serve it to him. He was busy, and when he looked back, Mr. Thorne already had a fresh glass. We also interviewed a waiter who said a woman bumped into him right near Thorne's location, but he was flustered and couldn't give a clear description. He looked up from his notebook, his eyes locking onto hers. You told me you spoke to him that night. Did you happen to see who brought him that drink? Isabella's heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs, but her expression remained one of thoughtful concern. That's strange. I did speak with him, yes. I brought him a drink from the bar myself. Miller's eyebrows raised slightly. You did? You didn't mention that in your original statement. Didn't I? I'm so sorry, Detective. The whole night was such a chaotic blur, she said, her voice laced with the perfect amount of apologetic confusion. Ethan was so stressed, and I was trying to run interference. I thought offering Marcus a drink might be a kind of peace offering, to show there were no hard feelings about the museum contract. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. It seems a bit silly in hindsight, I suppose. I just grabbed a bottle and a glass from the bar. I had no idea the bartender was keeping track. It was a calculated risk. To deny being near the bar would be a lie easily disproven if a clearer witness emerged. The better strategy was to embed the truth within a larger, more palatable fiction. Her version was plausible, magnanimous even. Miller scribbled in his notebook. A peace offering. I see. And you poured it yourself. Yes. It was just quicker, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. And you didn't notice anything unusual? The glass, the scotch. Detective, it was a loud, crowded party, she said, her tone gentle but firm. I was focused on trying to smooth things over between two men I cared about. I wasn't performing a chemical analysis of the whiskey. Miller was silent for a long moment, simply watching her. It was the most unnerving part of his technique. He created a vacuum and waited for you to rush to fill it with mistakes. Isabella did not. She sat quietly, meeting his gaze, a portrait of patient cooperation. All right, Mrs. Hayes, he said at last, snapping his notebook shut and rising to his feet. Thank you for clearing that up. You've been very helpful. As she walked him to the door, he paused on the threshold. It's a beautiful home, he said, looking around. Your husband is a very talented man. It's a good thing he got that museum project. A man needs a legacy. The words were innocuous, but the tone was laced with something that made the fine hairs on Isabella's arms stand up. Felt like an accusation. She closed the door behind him and leaned against it, her perfect composure finally cracking. He knew. He didn't have proof, but he knew. He was the loose thread in her flawless design. And loose threads, she knew from experience, had to be snipped. Her surveillance of Miller began that afternoon. She was as methodical and discreet in this endeavor as she had been with Marcus. She created a new, anonymous digital identity and began to build a profile. Miller was divorced, lived in a small, unremarkable suburban house, and had 2 grown children he rarely saw. He was a lifer on the force, a man with a reputation for being a bloodhound, for closing cold cases others had long forgotten. He was respected but not well liked. He was a loner. She discovered he was a recovering gambling addict. He attended weekly Gamblers Anonymous meetings in a church basement on the other side of town. He hadn't placed a bet in over a decade, but the addiction was a scar on his record, a vulnerability. It was a start. Meanwhile, Miller was quietly persistent. He couldn't get a warrant to search her home or finances based on a hunch, so he started pulling at the periphery. He re-interviewed the caterers. He requested the toxicology report on Marcus again, looking for anything the ME might have missed. He started looking into Isabella's background, her life before Ethan. Isabella knew she had to escalate her efforts. She needed to get inside his life, to find a lever she could use to dislodge him. She used a sophisticated phishing email, disguised as a departmental update, to get him to log into a fake police portal, capturing his personal email and social media passwords. It was a breathtakingly risky move, a felony in itself, but she felt a cold, exhilarating calm as she did it. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Poring through his emails and private messages, she found what she was looking for. Miller had a younger sister, Chloe, who was in and out of rehab for a prescription pill addiction. He was her sole source of support, both financially and emotionally. He sent her money every month and wrote her long, anguished emails, begging her to stay clean, pleading with her not to give up. He was terrified of losing her. He was compromised. The plan that formed in Isabella's mind was audacious and cruel. It wasn't about killing Miller. A dead cop investigating an accidental death would trigger a massive, unstoppable investigation. No, she had to kill his career. She had to discredit him so thoroughly that no one would ever listen to him again. She would use his love for his sister to destroy him. First, she created a fake online profile. A woman named Jessica, a sympathetic nurse who connected with Chloe in an online support group for addicts. Over several weeks, Isabella, as Jessica, groomed Chloe, earning her trust, listening to her struggles, and subtly validating her sense of hopelessness. Next, Isabella used a prepaid burner phone and a voice distorter to call in an anonymous tip to the police department's internal affairs division. The tipster claimed to have evidence that a decorated detective, Miles Miller, was dirty. The final piece was the setup. Isabella knew from Miller's emails that his sister's rent was due. She also knew Miller was working a complex racketeering case against a notorious local crime figure. Using her digital access, she found the location of a scheduled evidence drop in that Cassia bag of confiscated, marked bills. On the day the rent was due, Isabella, as Jessica, sent Chloe a message filled with panic. She claimed she had relapsed, that she was in trouble with a dangerous dealer, and that she needed to get rid of a bag of hot money. She preyed on Chloe's vulnerability, convincing her that helping would be a way to strike back at the kind of people who preyed on addicts. She gave Chloe an address, a locker in a bus station, and a key, telling her to pick up the bag and hold it for her. Inside, she said, was $1,000 for her trouble. Enough for rent. Desperate and manipulated, Chloe agreed. The bag Chloe retrieved did not contain money from a drug dealer. It was a portion of the marked evidence money from Miller's case, which Isabella had daringly intercepted, using knowledge of the transport schedule gleaned from Miller's own files. The anonymous tip to Internal Affairs bore fruit. They put a tail on Miller. They watched him meet his sister in a park. They watched as he, seeing her distress, hugged her. And they watched as she, terrified, passed him an envelope containing the $1,000 of marked money for her rent money that came from the evidence bag. To the surveillance team, it looked like a classic payoff. A dirty cop using his addict sister as a mule. The sting went down right there in the park. Internal Affairs swarmed them. Miller was arrested, his face a mask of utter disbelief and horror. The rest of the marked money was found in the bus station locker, Chloe's fingerprints all over the bag. The story was devastatingly perfect. Detective Miles Miller, the celebrated bloodhound, was dirty. He was feeding information to the mob, using his drug addict sister to move the cash. His career wasn't just over, it was incinerated. Every case he had ever worked on was now called into question, including the accidental death of Marcus Thorne. His obsession with that case was recontextualized as an attempt to frame an innocent woman to distract from his own corruption. Isabella watched the news report on television, curled up on the sofa next to Ethan. She placed a hand on his chest, her face a mask of sympathetic sorrow. "That poor man," she said, shaking her head. "You just never know who people really are. Do you?" "No, you don't," Ethan said, pulling her closer. He felt a deep sense of relief. The detective's visits had unsettled him, and he was glad the strange, unpleasant chapter was finally over. He kissed the top of her head. "I'm just glad we have no secrets." Isabella smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. She felt a surge of triumph. She had faced a formidable opponent and had brilliantly excised him from their lives. She had protected her king, her castle, her perfect world. She was safe. They were safe. But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't shake the image of Miller's face as he was arrested. The raw, soul-deep betrayal in his eyes. She had not just ruined a man. She had destroyed a brother's love for his sister and a sister's trust in her brother. She had taken his greatest virtue, his love for his family, and turned it into a weapon against him. A small, cold part of her recognized the monstrousness of the act. But she walled it off, burying it deep. Love, she told herself, required difficult choices. And she would choose Ethan and their perfect life every single time, no matter the cost. 2 years passed. The perfection Isabella had fought so hard to protect had blossomed. Ethan's museum was a triumph of modern design, a new jewel in the city's skyline. His firm was inundated with prestigious offers. Their life was an idyllic portrait of success and love. The birth of their son, Leo, a year ago, had completed the picture. He was a beautiful, happy baby with Ethan's thoughtful eyes and Isabella's fiery red hair. He was the living embodiment of their love, the ultimate symbol of the future she had secured. The scandal surrounding Detective Miller had faded into old news. He had been dishonorably discharged, his conviction on corruption charges all but certain until his sister, in a moment of rehab-fueled clarity, recanted her entire story. She confessed to being manipulated by an online friend she had never met. But with no proof of Jessica's existence and Chloe's history as an unreliable witness, the confession only served to muddy the waters. The charges were eventually dropped, but Miller's career and reputation were irrevocably shattered. He disappeared from public life. Isabella never thought of him. She had compartmentalized her actions, locking them away in a vault in her mind labeled necessary. Her days were filled with Leo, with charity luncheons, with being the perfect wife to a celebrated architect. She had everything she had ever wanted. The first sign that the vault was not as secure as she believed came not as a person, but as a piece of paper. It was an invoice from a private data recovery service, mistakenly sent to their home address instead of Ethan's office. He had hired a firm to retrieve files from an old, corrupted hard drive from his college days, early designs, sentimental photos. He mentioned it to her casually over dinner. "They managed to get everything back," he said, spooning mashed peas into Leo's mouth. "Even things I thought were long gone. It's amazing what they can do." Isabella smiled, but a cold, metallic taste filled her mouth. "Even things I thought were long gone." The phrase echoed in her mind. Her own digital tracks were meticulously covered. She used military-grade encryption, routed her activities through servers in a dozen countries, and always wiped her drives. She was a professional. But the tiny seed of doubt, had been planted. A week later, Ethan was working late in his home studio. Isabella was rocking Leo to sleep, humming a soft lullaby, when her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Contained only a single photograph. It was a grainy, time-stamped security camera still. It showed a woman with fiery red hair at the bar of the architect's gala, her back to the camera, pouring a drink. The timestamp was from 2 years ago, minutes before Marcus Thorne had collapsed. Isabella's blood turned to ice. She stared at the photo, her breath caught in her throat. It was impossible. She had personally verified that the security camera in that corner had been on a loop, a technical glitch. How could this exist? Her phone buzzed again. A new message from the same number. "The problem with wiping a server is that you can never be sure you get all the backups. He's a good man, Mrs. Hayes. He deserves to know who he's married to. I suggest you tell him, or I will." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Miller. He was back. He hadn't given up. The disgraced, broken detective had spent 2 years in the wilderness, piecing together the ghost of a case. Panic, an emotion she had not truly felt in years, seized her. Her first instinct was to erase, to attack, to neutralize this new threat. But how? Miller was off the grid. He was a ghost. Her methods, digital assassination, careful surveillance, would work. Her second instinct was to run, to take Leo and Ethan and disappear, to start a new life somewhere else. But that was impossible. Their lives, Ethan's career, were here. To run would be a confession of guilt. There was only one path left, the one she had never, ever wanted to contemplate. She had to get ahead of the story. She had to tell Ethan herself. She had to frame it in a way he could understand, a way he could forgive. She would have to make him an accomplice to her secret. She put Leo in his crib, her hands trembling. She walked to Ethan's studio, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. He was hunched over a drafting table, the warm glow of his lamp illuminating his tired, handsome face. He looked up when she entered, a loving smile instantly appearing. "Hey you," he said. "Couldn't sleep?" "Ethan," she began, her voice strained. "We need to talk." The look on her face wiped the smile from his. He turned off the lamp and gave her his full attention. "Izzy? What is it? You're scaring me." And so she told him. Not all of it. Not the cold, meticulous planning. Not the clinical satisfaction she had felt. She told him a carefully edited version, a version designed for his heart. She painted Marcus as a relentless monster, pushing Ethan to the brink of suicide. She described her actions as a moment of desperate, terrified love. "He was going to destroy you, Ethan," she said, tears streaming down her face, tears that were both real and a performance. "He was going to take everything from us. Our future, our family. I was so scared. I wasn't thinking, I had to make it stop. I did it for you. I did it for us." Ethan stared at her, his face utterly blank. He looked as if she had been speaking a foreign language. He shook his head slowly, a deep, furrowed line appearing between his brows. "What are you saying?" he whispered. You brought him a drink? A drink that was contaminated? I had to," she sobbed, reaching for his hand. He pulled it away as if her touch had burned him. "No," he said, the word barely audible. He stood up and began to pace the small studio, his movements agitated. "No, no, no. Marcus had an accident. A tragic. The caterers." He was reciting the official story, the one that had allowed him to sleep at night. He was clinging to it like a life raft. "It wasn't an accident," she said softly. "I made sure it wasn't." The confession hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her. And for the first time, Isabella did not see love in his eyes. She saw horror. She saw the gaze of a man looking at a complete and terrifying stranger. "The detective," he said, his voice flat. "Miller, that was you too, wasn't it? You framed him." The question was so direct, so perceptive, it stole her breath. She had underestimated him. She had thought his goodness was a form of blindness. She was wrong. She could only nod, a fresh wave of tears falling. Ethan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He ran his hands through his hair, his whole body trembling. "My God, Isabella, what have you done?" "I saved you," she cried, her voice rising with a frantic edge of hysteria. "I saved us. This house, your career, our son. None of it would exist if I hadn't done what I did. I built this life for us. I protected it." "Protected it?" he roared, his voice finally breaking with a torrent of raw, unleashed anguish. "You didn't protect it. You poisoned it. Every moment, every success, our wedding, the day Leo was born. All of it. It's all built on a grave. It's a lie." He looked around the studio, at the walls covered in his designs, his awards, the photos of them smiling, of Leo's first steps. His eyes were filled with a profound, soul-shattering revulsion. "I need to get out of here," he whispered. "I need to breathe." He walked past her, out of the studio, his movements stiff, robotic. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of the front door opening and closing. Then silence. Isabella stood alone in the studio, the perfect world she had built collapsing around her in silence. She had committed monstrous acts for the sake of a perfect love. But in the end, her methods had destroyed the very thing she had sought to protect. The love in Ethan's eyes had been the foundation of her entire world, and she had just watched it die. She didn't know how long she stood there. An hour. A lifetime. The front door opened again. Ethan was back. But he was not alone. Behind him stood the rumpled, weary, and utterly resolute figure of Miles Miller. Ethan wouldn't meet her eyes. "He was outside," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "He called me. He told me everything. He was giving me a chance. A chance to be the one to do the right thing." Isabella looked from her husband's empty face to the detective's grim one. There was no victory in Miller's eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. He had not won. They had all lost. "Isabella Hayes," Miller said, his voice raspy but clear, "you're under arrest for the murder of Marcus Thorne." Isabella didn't resist. She didn't speak. As the detective read her rights, her gaze drifted to a photo on the wall. It was from their wedding day. She and Ethan, laughing, bathed in golden sunlight, the picture of perfect love. She finally understood the terrible irony of her life's work. In her obsessive quest to protect her storybook ending, she had written herself as the villain. She had fought to ensure nothing would part them until death. But she had been the death all along. The death of innocence, the death of truth, and finally the death of love. The vow was fulfilled. Their perfect love was at last parted.